jump straight in. Christoph, whilst we wait for the other panelists to join Gloria and Luis, Christoph, how bad is the situation? How bad is travel and tourism? How much damage, real damage, has been done in your view?
Well, it has been devastating. Yeah, so I think altogether, I mean, very well coordinated by WTTC. I think the numbers are out. Yeah, so the travel and tourism is 10% of global GDP. So there, I mean, many million revenues are lost, and they're lost for good, as this is a perishable product. And there's many countries around the globe whose economy depends 50%, 70% on travel and tourism, and they don't have actually generous packages that they can give to their employees. So there's real suffering around the globe on a massive scale. And I think we need to, as we are talking about travel restrictions, especially on North America and Europe, so we have to take that into account.
Right. No, Gloria, I can understand in the early part of the pandemic, it's natural that countries pull up the drawbridge. That's natural. You're not going to take a risk on the health side with any form of, even if tourism is vital, you're not going to take that risk. But now we're into phase 2 or phase 3 of this crisis. Why are we not seeing more greater coordination, do you think, Gloria?
I think, unfortunately, I mean, what I have heard is this outbreak is similar to like 9/11, Richard, in a way. What 9/11 was for the safety officials, I mean, security, now this is for the public health officials. It's an unprecedented territory. They were not prepared. And unfortunately, they didn't have protocols to deal with this, despite that we talk about that for years. And they are just looking inwards. They're looking to their own countries, how they protect their citizens without learning from each other, without talking to others.
But that's inevitable. But that surely, I mean, Lewis, you're in government, you're sort of running a national tourism agency at the UTC. That is inevitable, that people are going, governments are, I mean, the British government is a classic example on this, how to basically say, we're not taking a risk. We're not going to let people come in.
Yes, it's true. But I have to tell you that the situation, when you asked the situation was desperate, we went back 25 years. So far, until the end of the year, we will have the same number of guests we had in 1995. The problem is we have 10 times more companies, more people working, more entrepreneurs spread through the entire country that need to survive. And that we always say it's a matter of time and space. Time, because one day that passes is one day lost for our industry, but for health, it's one day they recover. It's one day that they're closer to the vaccine. And it's also a matter of space. For health, we need to stay quiet, but we need mobility for tourism. So there is a balance between two that you have to reach. And you were asking, what can we do? Well, we have to sit everyone at the same table and discuss things. It is possible to travel in a safe manner. And I think the industry is prepared for that, with the protocols, with everything. So and it's even better. We can get data from the movement and from this mobility and give it for a risk assessment.
Dr. Liu, the issue of air travel, you can bang on about HEPA filters till the cows come home. You can point out the air flows and new boarding procedures, but what is the situation? How can we tell people that flying is safe?
I think it was a great comment that was just made. I really think we've got to have consistency, and this is the biggest problem with air traffic security, whether it's TSA in the US or security around Europe or in China, it's all the same. We don't have that. We don't even have close to that, and that's the biggest problem.
Right, but Dr. Liu, from ICAO's point of view, how can you get out the message, if indeed it's a valid message, that flying is not inherently dangerous for COVID because of the protocols in place?
It's an excellent question. Actually, ICAO have been trying to tell the public that on boarding on on airplane, flying with airplane is same as you going to a grocery. And however, there is it's not only for the aviation sector can tell, but I think the health authorities need also to tell the same voice. And then I think the travel authorities together with health authorities at the international level and at the national level should have the same voice and provide the same procedure. And
Right.
we have been working very closely with WHO and working on that. And we already issued, as you know, we call the CAT report, and with the guidelines for our industry. And I think we can do more to address this.
You see, what I see is, yeah, go ahead, Gloria.
Let me just interrupt a little bit, Richard, a little bit here controversial. I think Dr. Feng Luqi is wonderful and it's a pleasure to work with her, but unfortunately, other international organizations have failed on us, honestly. Like for instance, I don't have a problem with WHO, but I do have a problem when I see one message from one director of a region in the morning, and in the afternoon, I see a different message. And I'm sure that you have seen that as well. The one in the morning say it is okay to travel. The one in the afternoon is say it's better the quarantines. How do we fix that? And we have the same situation with other international organizations that deal with governments. That's very complicated and that creates a lot of confusion, no?
I don't, okay, but Christoph, I'm going to suggest that however right Gloria might be, it's inevitable, because what this has done is it's created I'm okay. I pull up the ladder. You know, I'm not going to take a risk. The EU found itself in a very tricky position with Schengen, to the point where Schengen had to suspend. And if you now multiply that across the world, you end up, Christoph, with a situation where you can talk about coordination all you like. It's never going to happen.
Well, I think health officials, first of all, take a domestic point of view. Yeah, and in these days with coronavirus cases rising all over Europe and in the United States to a level where actually we're getting into this hospital situation where triage is becoming something real. Yeah, so people don't take risk. I mean, what we're telling from the travel sector, I mean, there should be a risk-based approach, but I think at this level, domestic level, that each health official face, they won't take risk-based approaches. But I mean, we've also heard over the last couple of weeks that actually there's light at the end of the tunnel. So there is actually extraordinary progress on the vaccine front. And there's actually more and more anticipation that by spring, yeah, I mean, people, it may vary.
But is that, but Roger, is that really what we're going to grasp on? I think Christoph's right, but is that we're just going to wait for the vaccine? You'll end up with a hodgepodge of very complicated rules and testing and quarantines, 2 days, 5 days, test before, test on. But ultimately, hold your breath, you got to wait for the vaccine.
Well, I think we've got to get this thing to a risk-based situation, very similar to what we did with terrorism. I mean, there's terrorism threat every single day, but the layered approach we've taken is what solved the situation. We've got to get to a situation where it's vaccine, it's testing, it's protocols at hotels, it's travelers doing all things. We've got to get all that in place and then there's going to be a risk. There are going to be some cases, but we have got politicians that want to, as you said in the UK, go to zero risk, and the world doesn't work that way.
Lewis.
I think I totally agree. And to correct something, I think there is already trust between the consumers. People want to travel. We've seen that between the UK and Portugal. During those 3 weeks, we went to the Green Corridor. The demand exploded. People want to travel. The problem here is a matter of communication. Different rules are taken in different countries, sometimes with 24 hours in advance, and this is not possible. And second, there has to be trust between ourselves. Tourism sector has to dialogue with the health sector, because this is a crucial point to sit and discuss things. We can give data in order to prevent the spreading, and this is crucial. There have been 44 infected in 1.2 billion people traveling inside aircrafts. What is this? It's even safer than going to a shop, I think. So if there is demand, if there is trust being rebuilt, we need coordination, but with effective rules. Having personal locator cards that are common to the entire countries, the apps that speak to themselves and interconnect and exchange information. This is what we're talking about.
Why have we done a truly awful job of coordination since the Gloria? I'll start with you and then to Christoph. I mean, since the start of this pandemic, all I've heard is you, Gloria, say there needs to be coordination. Everybody says there needs to be coordination, but I don't see coordination.
You're absolutely right. That's exactly the challenge in this outbreak, and that's going to be the challenge for the recovery. I don't know, Richard. I think it's just because we are concerned, the politicians, and I'm a former politician, remember that, concerned to making decisions and impacting your citizens, right? No one wants to take the risk, and we don't learn from the past. Like I think it was Roger or someone that mentioned 9/11. In the case of that situation, we did a risk-based assessment, right? They need to do something similar here, but they need to learn from each other, and they are not learning from each other. The governments, they are concentrated only on their citizens, and they don't understand that this world is very connected, or they don't want to see it. I don't know. That's a great question.
Can I give two reasons?
Yeah,
just simple ones?
Go ahead.
The first one, we had lack of coordination because we spent too much time speaking between ourselves, the tourism sector. And we chose the wrong people to speak, because we know our problems, we know what's happening to us, but we need solutions, and we need to discuss them with local governments, with national governments, and with health authorities, national and international, first. Second, we need effective rules. We need to be part of the solution. We can be part of the solution. And I think any government or any association on the world thinks that tourism is part of the solution, and we can be. And this is what's missing.
Yeah.
But Liz, do you think that also that is missing is the health officials are not talking to health officials?
Probably.
That's also
yes.
the lack of coordination.
Agree. And it's easier to shut down. It's easier to control. It's easier to limit mobility instead of allowing people to move and seeing where do they move, what impact that has in infection, what kind of impact has a person going from Portugal to France or any other country and coming back. This is what is important to discuss. And unfortunately, we're not talking enough about data. We're talking about number of people dead and number of infections. And we need different kind of data.
Christoph and then Roger.
Yeah, let's talk about data. I think that's a great keyword. Yeah, so the World Economic Forum is not just working on tourism. We're working on all sectors, including the health sector. We're working on public and private and trying to build platforms. And actually in June, we felt this can only work if there's a globally acknowledged data platform that gives a health credential to an individual that wants to cross border and gives basically a clear proof that about the health status to government officials that may be doubting. Yeah, so it's very easy to fraud, basically to come up with a paper and say, oh, I'm vaccinated or I'm testing or whatever. So you need to build a common platform, and I think this is actually where we can coordinate and we can harmonize that, yeah, between ourselves and basically make an offer to government officials that have a difficult job, yeah, to balance domestic and international agendas, yeah, and primarily work on domestic agendas. Right. But give them a proof, yeah, that there is a way forward that is valid for as long as we are in a testing regime, but will be even more valid once we move forward into a vaccination regime.
Roger.
Yeah, I'm here in the United States of America. And unfortunately, we're the un-United States of America. We're just talking about the US. I'm talking to you today from Florida. Florida is wide open. Disney World is open. I'll move across the country to California, shut down for 3 weeks. Disneyland closed, Universal closed. We have quarantines in states. 83% of the people, according to IATA, will not fly anywhere if there's a quarantine in place. And we've got to solve this thing. I'm very concerned, Richard, we're going to get into pandemic fatigue. and people are just going to not put up with this. And I'm
Well,
also
Roger,
concerned
Roger.
about the mental health. I mean, one state told me they have 13 kids have killed themselves, the youngest being 18 years old. And we've got to address, this is just not about this disease, it's about everything else happening.
Right, but Roger, to your point about Florida open, California closed, what's the solution that for tourism that allows for local local effects or local situations, but doesn't shut the whole thing down? I mean, admittedly, the US has been spectacularly unique in not having any sort of national policy on any of this or any direction, but that's another issue for another day. Would you be, I mean, how do you balance California being closed and Florida being open?
I think it's a case of a national emergency and a global emergency that we've got to bring the people together, the governors together, and say, we are going to solve this and have one common protocol. It has to happen, and until that happens,
but it didn't.
we're having patchwork.
Right, but Dr. Liu, it didn't happen. And what is frustrating, Roger's right, he's got the evidence. I mean, not being disrespectful, Dr. Liu, but what have you all been doing at the global level?
We really are working very hard and with all the communities. And I'm very thankful for every segment of our community actively participated in the ACIL's platform to share the best practices and develop guidelines for all our industry. Mm-hmm. And then the most important critical point as I want to make is it's not only the travel and aviation sector and aviation authorities. It will need to engage the other authorities like health authorities, like immigration authorities, because they are decision makers for how, whether to open the borders based on the risk, and then how to mitigate the risks. And we have since the beginning, and unfortunately I should say, ACIL established with WHO so-called CAPSCA mechanism, engage national and international experts from the health authorities together with the aviation authorities, with also our industry together, and also our national authority like United States and Europeans health authorities. We developed, as I said, CAT reports and guidelines, which are very helpful for the whole industry. But I think more work needs to be done.
If we take what Dr. Liu's just said and we draw a line under the lack of the current situation, we are where we are and we sit where we sit. Christoph, we're now in a new opportunity. I would suggest you're going to write off January, February, March. Wouldn't the industry, Christoph, be better off planning now? Admittedly, this is a Northern Hemispheric view, but wouldn't the industry be better off planning for a coordinated reopening, June, July, August, when vaccines are more prevalent?
Well, I think the vaccine situation makes a big change. Yeah. So, and I think that we said that before. I want to say one thing. I think ICAO, WTTC, and others, actually, European Commission, have been very fast actually to come up with the joint health and safety guidelines. But now we need to make it operational. Yeah. And yes,
I don't agree. Christoph. I'm sorry. I don't agree. They may have come forward. They may have been fast with sort of general national guidelines, but the mere fact that the travel and tourism industry in this discussion, each one of you has said lack of coordination. Now they can have all the pieces of paper they want with the policies, but have they been implemented?
Yeah, but as I mean, I think Dr. Liu was saying we need. It's not the travel and tourism industry talking to itself. It's actually the health industry that makes a decision. So it's a sovereign decision by each country, and we may like it or not, and we may ask for consistency, but at the end of the day, it's a sovereign decision by each country, even within the EU. The EU can make recommendations, but it's each country to implement that. And now we need to create the confidence, and I think we have worked indeed very hard actually to put forward systems where governments can now hook in when domestically hopefully the COVID numbers go down and when a vaccine is available. And I would be confident that comes spring, yeah, and with actually a lot of continued work from our side together with individual governments, we are in a situation where we can allow travel again.
I would agree with Christoph. As from our information, we established the so-called public health corridors, and also we called like travel bubbles solutions, which are actually effective for some states and also for some region. And we see the good sign from the public confidence to travel and to also to go to leisure travel even. So I think that is the positive side. And that's why ICAO will also issued in early November, the second phase of our cut report focus on the risk management, and which include the testing options for the states to choose based on the risk assessment about each state.
Taking where we stand and looking forward to next year, we sort of everybody, there's common agreement that there needs to be greater coordination, needs to be greater communication. So to you, Luis, what is the next step forward? And let's not worry about how we got here.
Yeah.
Let's worry about making sure we don't make the same mistakes, because the opportunity is now on the table. The vaccine will change things by next summer.
I will start by that. The vaccine is a very good news, but it's not enough, because we will have COVID 20, 21, 22, 23. We now have more than 6 billion people, experts in virology in the entire world. So this is going to be with us forever. If we don't decide which protocols to implement, if we don't think that we need to have apps that speak to themselves on different countries, if we don't have the connection and the data information between countries in order for the health authorities to do risk assessment and risk management, we will be here with the same problems next year or next 6 months. Now, the future. So one of the pieces of the future is taking care of this. We need to establish clear protocols for traveling, creating a seamless and safe travel experience. WTTC did that, launching the Safe Travel Seal. We did that in Portugal. Our companies are ready. 23,000 hotels, golf courses, restaurants are ready to protect people from the virus. What we need to know is attending the needs of the new customer. And I think that's the second point. How can we address those issues based on sustainability, all that?
So we've got Travel Pass and we've got Common Pass coming down the road, Roger Dow. Can you see the US? I mean, we all heard Alan Joyce from Qantas spoke the truth that nobody really wants to say, is that you're going to need a vaccine certificate, and you're going to, in the fullness of time, either have your testing or your vaccination lodged in a secure, integral part. Roger, Travel Pass, Common Pass, is that the future?
Most likely for the short term, for international travel, yes. I don't want to see it for domestic travel. I think we're going to have one hell of a problem if we're telling the people in the US to fly from New York to Washington, D.C., you need a vaccine or a travel pass. It's a real challenge, but I think for the short term, for the future, you're probably going to have a travel pass or something along those lines for international travel.
And do we risk, Roger, stay with you for a second, do we risk, and then come to Dr. Liu, a sort of a haves and have-nots? And I mean, you know, I'm already thinking, oh my God, to do my job middle of next year, I've got to make sure I've got a vaccination, because I won't be able to go to XYZ.
No question about it. And that is going to be the case, but it's the only way we're going to come out of this thing. We've got to come out of it step by step, piece by piece. It's not going to be one turn the switch solution.
Dr. Liu, how much can ICAO, UNWTO, WTTC, the international organizations, how much can you get ahead of this? It seems to me until now, it's been catch up, but you do have the opportunity to get ahead.
Absolutely. We have already started to work with WHO and also with cooperation with UNWTO and as well as WTTC and our IATA and ACI, our industry together to see how we can implement our procedure. As a matter of fact, ICAO has standards about the health disease, in related air travel. And now what's important is how we can implement these standards and also to develop detailed procedures and manuals for our member states and industry to be implemented. And then there is a capacity issue. And we need to help our member states to build the capacity and also the equipments, the system in order the aviation and also the public can be confident to go through this recovery phase.
Quick questions from our people who've asked questions. Short answers, please. This one to Christoph from Richard Horton. People do not want to be trapped by governments they do not trust. Health, actually, no, this is for either you or Lewis who were talking about health apps. For you, Lewis, you're changing directions. Lewis first. While health apps will be effective for travel populations, they do not want Big Brother tracking them.
Well, it's a very complicated question, but I'll answer you very briefly. We all want the same. Being inside the tourism sector or outside the tourism sector, we want mobility. We want to move. And the thing we're missing is allowing people to move from one place to the other or from one country to the other with clear information, with clear communication. And we can help on this. I think everyone has interest in traveling. So filling a card to enter another country or saying if I had COVID or I hadn't and doing a testing is something that we're prepared to do. Everyone is prepared to do. These are the rules. So we have to comply with the rules. But the problem now here is we don't have rules. And that's the biggest problem.
Okay, Roger from Johan Radnik. What can privately owned businesses and travel do if their government is inefficient in handling the pandemic and the high level of infections?
It's going to be extremely difficult for privates to solve. One thing we need is a liability protection. There is no way that companies are going to allow their people to travel with the risk they're going to get sued. There's no way that hotel companies will want to take the risk of being sued and someone saying they've got a pandemic here. So one of the things that has to come along with all this is liability protection. Until we have that, and certain countries are starting to put it in right now, but we've got to have some kind of liability protection as we do with terrorism.
An anonymous question. How many here have been vaccinated? Have any of you taken the vaccination? Put your hand up if you have managed to get your hands either on the Russian or the Chinese vaccination. No one's been vaccinated. How many would take the vaccine? You can take the Chinese, you can take the Russian, you can take Moderna, you can take Pfizer, you can take AstraZeneca, you can take them all. How many of you would take it if offered by next summer?
Well, I don't need to take it because I'm immune already. That's the good thing.
Can I offer an opinion about privacy and some of the question that came in before?
That's what you're here for, sir.
Okay, so I think you mentioned Common Pass, yeah. So and Common Pass is built on the Common Trust Network. The Common Trust Network includes basically the data registry, basically all labs, certified labs that governments can trust that somebody who shows that is really vaccinated, not just provides a fraud certificate. And it's combined with the entry rules. That is Common Pass, actually. And we think we need a system like this around the globe so that actually governments have the trust to let somebody into their country because they need to build in a high bar to protect their own citizens. So this is actually at the heart of the whole thing. And that needs to be scalable because otherwise we can't travel around the globe. Yeah, so we need kind of five systems. We need one system. And I think this is what this group is actually working on harmonized systems and protocols.
We're in our last few moments of our discussion. Roger, start us off at the end, towards the end.
Yeah, I think there's a common knowledge among epidemiologists, and I'm not one, that pandemics and diseases get tired and go to sleep. The Spanish flu was not solved by a vaccine. We still have Ebola, we still have bubonic plague, we still have SARS, we still have swine flu, but there's a minimal amount. My concern is we're going to put all this thing in place and this thing's going to slow down and go to sleep. I think we're going to be in a situation for the rest of the travel industry that health security is going to become the new hospitality, and hotels and people are going to be rated on health security as they are on quality and service.
Very interesting. Yes, Dr. Liu.
Pandemic COVID-19 is global disease, and we need global solution. So ICAO is a very important platform for international cooperation, and also we have done in the past, and we'll continue to do it in cooperation with WHO and other international organizations. But also important is for the private sector, for the active participation, to encourage the national governments also to cooperate, to implement the international guidelines. And in order we can have aligned, harmonized procedures for the international travel.
Christoph.
I think the key word is trust. This will only be possible, as Dr. Liu is saying, to cross borders if governments trust each other and if they have basically trusted records on which they can base their decisions. It's also based on the trust of citizens. I mean, there were actually questions about privacy. So I think we needed solutions like Common Pass, which are privacy by design. And we need, at the end of the day, there won't be harmonized testing requirements or requirements by each country. So we will need robust solutions that can actually deal with the diversity of individual countries.
Luis.
Well, I think the sector is dying from the cure, that's for sure. Because each day that passes is a day that we lose. And we've understand, I think each country, every country in the world has understand for the first time the importance of tourism, the good things of tourism for their own countries, for every country, and the impact this is having on many other sectors, from agriculture to fishing. And the important thing here is thinking of ways to solve this together. Health authorities and tourism authorities, nationally and internationally. And second, thinking about the future. We want tourism to be, we want a better tourism, that's for sure. Everyone wants that. Concerned about the people. In fact, we should change the word tourism to yourism. Instead of thinking about the tour, think about the you. Right. And this is crucial right now, and we're ready to do that. Each small company is ready to do this in each country. So why can't we get this in an international level? That's my only question.
Gloria, you get the last word for a minute. You wrap us up, please.
Thank you. I guess, I mean, everything that has been said is very valuable, and we appreciate it, and thank you all the speakers. I think what it was also say is not the coordination among ourselves, Richard, is the coordination among countries. How do they implement this international testing protocol? How do we have the UK working with the US or the EU working with the US so that we can resume international travel with testing? We have been talking about that for months already. Finally, we see the light at the end of the tunnel. I don't think the vaccine is going to be the only solution. We need to have a process in place, as Roger mentioned and Dr. Liu as well, moving forward with the trust and with the coordination so that we can be prepared for the next one and recover faster from this one.
I thank you all, firstly, for bearing with us, and to you, our viewers, for bearing with us during the technical difficulties. And as always, I thank you, whatever you're up to. I hope it's profitable. Have a good day.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Well, I've been watching the last session with great interest. Thanks to Richard from CNN for hosting it. And we're really going to pick up on some of those issues. Just to introduce myself quickly, my name's Ros Atkins. I'm a presenter with BBC World News. I've been involved in a number of WTTC events over the last few years, and it's my pleasure to host this second session of 3 today. And the title of this next 45 minutes or so is Breaking Down Travel Barriers for a Swift Recovery, which really will build on the discussion that we've just heard, which is, given the situation that the travel and tourism industry finds itself in, given we know that vaccines are coming, but we also know that this pandemic is far from over? How can the travel and tourism industry explore ways of getting people moving while, of course, being respectful and considerate of the many health consequences and implications that we all have in our minds at the moment? Let me immediately introduce you to our guest today. We have JD O'Hara, Chief Executive Officer of Internova Travel Group, Paul Griffiths, CEO of Dubai Airports, Cindy Friedman, Chief of the Travelers Health Branch at the US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or CDC as we often call it, and Thomas Reinhardt, Managing Director of Airlines for Europe. And all of you, I suppose the thing that was crossing my mind as I listened to the last discussion is there are so many different areas to be worked on that at some point this industry has to decide what its priorities are, because it's not possible to take on every challenge at once. So as you look across the need to get people moving, but to do so in a safe way, what would you identify as being the priority for you from your perspective? Perhaps JD, we could start with you.
Sure. I think, good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me, and thanks, Ross. So I think replacing quarantines with testing and or vaccination is key to this for us. Creating air corridors, fast tracking the use of secure digital apps. I heard people talk about Common Pass. I was part of the trial for Common Pass several months ago. And so I think those are three quick things we can focus on. But a testing protocol and common framework for testing air travelers using fast, accurate, and accessible tests, I think is key. Contact tracing system also with synchronized data available to the private sector for tracking and support, and a system for aggregating global testing data. So travel advisors, I need to put in my plug, but travel advisors certainly going to play an important role in contact tracing for this. And then also standardizing health and hygiene protocols across industry sectors. And I think common standardization is really going to be key from my perspective.
Okay, so your emphasis is very much on how the industry as a whole and how countries as a whole work together to standardize the way that people move around. Just before I bring in the other three, I should also mention, as you're watching, there's a Q&A function. If you've got questions for any of our guests or responses to what they say, by all means post them. I can see them all coming in. Paul, what about you? What's the priority for you at the moment?
I think the first thing is to understand what we're dealing with here. And what we are actually dealing is a crisis in traveller confidence. And I do believe the industry actually has done a huge amount to reassure the traveller that the fairly confined environment of air travel, airports and airlines in particular, have done a huge amount of good work in assuring people that the safety of them in transit is pretty much assured. And I think we've done a lot that we haven't shouted about enough to encourage people to be confident that actually, whilst they travel, the likelihood of contracting COVID-19 is pretty minimal. I think, though, as I would agree with JD, the industry needs to get its act together, and we need to agree common protocols, because we've seen how clumsy the world has reacted in terms of being able to try and agree some form of proper quarantine, prevention, and testing regime across the world. That's not been well coordinated. And a huge number of people have been put off traveling by extended potential quarantines at the other end of the route. If we could harmonize that and suggest that testing and quarantine needs to take place before travel, that would be a huge step in the right direction. And also air corridors. We've got an extremely good example. 6.1 million people travel between Dubai and the UK every year. And since we established only 3 weeks ago the safe travel corridor, where the protocols are the same at both ends of the route, bookings in a single week jumped by 12%. So it just goes to show that's one of the very effective ways of speeding the recovery.
But I'm listening to you, Paul, and to you, JD, beforehand, talking about the need to standardize, talking about the need to have a pan-industry approach. But as you're talking, I'm thinking about any number of programs I've done in the news where we've detailed how individual countries have not been able to coordinate their pandemic response, the challenge of having a coherent international response, whether to the whole pandemic or specifically to this industry, is fiendishly difficult to deliver, isn't it, Paul?
It is fiendishly difficult to deliver. And this is why I think we need to work bilaterally between countries that really have got their act together and can agree a common protocol. This is the big divide between the industry voice and the reaction from government, which has been so sadly lacking across the world. And the difficulty is, I think the agendas are different. You know, okay, 1/3 of the entire travel industry employees have lost their jobs over the last 9 months. But the thing is, you see, governments across the world, I think, are focused on more pressing domestic issues, and they're not looking beyond their borders with great detail to try and establish these measures. So I think we've got to push on individual travel corridors, make them effective, and then prove to the rest of the world a series of bilateral agreements, which then ends up being one single multilateral agreement, is probably the only incremental way we're going to get to a decisive and effective outcome.
That's interesting. It sounds like you're placing a lot of emphasis on the need to better communicate both with customers and with governments. We'll explore that in a bit more detail in a moment, Paul. But first of all, Cindy, let me bring you in from the CDC. From your perspective, what is the priority for this industry at the moment? Cindy, you're muted. Let's just...
Yes, sorry.
There you go. That's all right.
Mistake.
Carry on.
Rookie mistake, but sure, we recognize that travel is a really important part of work and life in general. You know, just recently over the Thanksgiving holiday in the US, we saw the second busiest travel day since the pandemic. But we have to work on science-driven approaches for safer, more responsible travel. And those include some components that some of your other guests have mentioned, and that includes the traveler has to be aware of the risk at the origin where they're traveling from and the destination. There are, CDC has travel notices, other groups have travel notices that give the traveler ability to make an informed decision. The risk is not only during travel of contracting COVID, but also spreading COVID, and it makes it harder for governments to control the epidemic if travelers are seeding infections. So that's one area. I agree that testing before and after travel is a very crucial part of controlling the epidemic for travelers. Also, continuing mitigation measures like mask mandates. Those wearing masks on transportation is really critical. So, and soon we will have vaccines, and I think somebody alluded to that, you know, using vaccines with these other measures. They're not going to be we're not going to get coverage of everyone with a vaccine immediately, so we have to continue these other measures like testing and mask wearing as well.
And Cindy, as I'm listening to you, I can see Alexandra. Let me just pull up this comment because it was directly relevant to what you're saying here. And we were talking about international cooperation. Alexandra says we can't even agree on a common approach between federate states in Germany. As long as governments view travel as a risk for spreading the virus, they're not going to be willing to lift restrictions, and there can't be a recovery. And I wonder, in a blunt fashion, do you see further travel as simply a problem when the CDC looks at the situation in America?
No, and I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I don't think that controlling the epidemic is exclusive to also, you know, economic stimulus. They're not exclusive terms. So I think we can do both. We can have a way to control the epidemic and have safer, more responsible travel. As you've alluded to, things aren't necessarily, or in the last session, aren't going to be the same as we're used to, you know, from last year, but we can do both. We can have a way to travel safer and control the epidemic.
Cindy, thank you very much indeed. Those of you watching, keep those comments coming via the Q&A or the chat function, and I'll do my best to get through as many of them as I can between now and the end of the session. Now, last but not least, Thomas Reinhardt from Airlines for Europe. What is your priority when you look at the challenge of getting more people traveling, which is good for your industry, but in a way that, of course, respects their health and all the other considerations?
Yeah, thanks, Ross. Well, I think most of it has been mentioned already, but by JD and Paul specifically. But I think from a European perspective, what the airlines would like to see is that the EU governments abolish these ineffective quarantine measures and better coordinate and harmonize the travel restrictions. European authorities, by name of ECDC, have actually previously, some time ago already stated that the quarantines are ineffective in the current situation, where the transmission of the virus is already widespread across much of Europe, as you know. I think also we need to change something about the perception that traveling by air is highly, is high risk. I mean, the research shows that the travelers, the air travelers themselves are not the problem. I mean, they really account for a very small minority, in some cases less than 1% of the detected COVID cases, and they simply do not increase the rate of COVID-19 transmission. And that's not, as Paul alluded to, that's the sector has done a lot of work. I mean, we've worked very closely with ECDC, us, and European Commission to make sure that we agree on the strict hygiene protocols and that we make sure that passengers are fully informed. So industry actually has done its bit. And I think the governments, especially in Europe, across Europe, are really failing to get a harmonized approach. As Paul said, unfortunately, the health authorities, for understandable reason, but they're focusing too much on the national issue here. And really people need to understand, governments need to understand that air travel is still the safest way to travel across boundaries. The passengers are aware
Thomas,
of it.
if I can jump in there, if we leave aside the rights and wrongs of the quarantine, clearly the governments who are putting those quarantine measures in place would argue that they are justifiable. Clearly there's a frustration I'm hearing from you, I'm hearing from JD, I'm hearing from Paul in different ways that what you believe are important and convincing arguments are not being heard by the relevant powers that be within governments. How can the industry change its approach to try and get a different outcome? JD?
I just want to comment on Thomas's point here. I think just this morning, the European Union Safety Agency confirmed that imported cases account for just a small portion, I think less than 1%, to Paul's point. And I think in fact, they estimated that the prevalence of travelers is lower than the general population, right? So I think that's a salient point that I think is important to note. I think how can we're talking about Europe. Speaking for Americans, I guess Cindy, I'll speak for you, judging by your accent. But let's not leave out the United States, where states within the U.S. can't figure it out, right? Where there's even counties within states can't figure it out. And so I think just the ability for governments to get their act together and on the same page is going to be a tall order, but necessary to make this happen.
Richard Horton on the Q&A says, for us to get the attention of national governments, the importance of the travel sector to each economy needs to be emphasized. He says we need to appeal to the governments in terms of their self-interest. But Paul, I would think that you and many others already do make the economic case for the sector. We all know the facts behind the volume of contribution to GDP and the amount of people who are employed by the sector. So why is this argument not resonating more persuasively than you would want?
I think the problem is there's a lack of perspective here. We know that a lot of countries have very successfully managed to get the infection rates under control. The death rates, very, very fortunately, have plummeted since January. I think in the UK, you are far less likely to die from COVID-19 by a factor of about 5 than compared to people who contracted it earlier on in the year. And I think the thing is that the problem is that we've got to get out of a risk avoidance strategy. I think, as JD mentioned earlier, Ebola, SARS, a lot of pandemics, Spanish flu, that they actually still exist in the world. It's just that we've got them under control. And I think the thing is there are many, many more risks in the world that are fatal risks, but we control them and manage them. The amount of economic and social damage that's being done through the limitation on travel, I think, is the key message. And it's a balance. If we can manage the risk of COVID-19 through sensible measures, aided by a vaccine, we need to turn our attention towards the economic benefit. I mean, if you look at some of the heartbreaking stories, particularly from the north of England that I was looking earlier, about the number of people that are starving because the economic activity has pushed people below the poverty line, that is where the focus needs to be. So we need to be bolder, need to get governments to endorse the measures the industry is taking. We are an energy of growth. We are an energy of social and economic recovery. We just need to have the work we've done recognized to allow us to go about our business and facilitate the recovery of life as we formerly knew it. That, to me, has to be the focus.
Cindy, I'd like to bring you in here. And just before we carry on, you're referring, I think, Paul, to a new report by Ed Thomas from the BBC, which is available on the BBC News website. It's very uncomfortable and upsetting viewing. You're right to highlight it. But Cindy, I'm feeling a palpable frustration from JD and Thomas and Paul in different ways that the advice given to individuals with reference to travel is no longer matching where the travel industry has got to in terms of the management of risk, to use Paul's phrase. Do you think that's fair, or do you think that, difficult though this is, actually we need to be cautious in terms of how we open up travel?
Look, I definitely understand where they're coming from, and I understand that there are economic challenges to many industries, including the travel industry. But I do think that we are in the midst of a pandemic. Hospitals are filling up in the United States. I can speak to the United States, and we need to make travel, available but safer. And I think that even if we just said tomorrow, okay, back to the way it was, go travel, no restrictions, I'm not sure that the general public would just feel comfortable traveling. So we want to make travel safer. And I think using testing is one aspect that is coming into play now. There are other things like sanitation. People mentioned that the actual airplane ride itself is pretty safe, but there's the crowded air terminals, there's the whole transportation on the way to the airport, and air travel isn't the only mode of transportation. So I think we have to utilize other measures like testing, with maybe a shortened period of stay at home. Many countries are changing their guidance for testing and self-quarantine to a shorter period of time. Data has become available. As the pandemic evolves, we learn more and things change. We can't get stuck in one phase of, general, lockdown, don't travel. We evolve as we learn more information. So we are using testing now as a way to make travel safer. So I think we have to be flexible, and I can understand the frustration, but I don't think we can just, pretend that there is no pandemic and business as usual. We have to make adjustments.
I'm interested, Cindy, in this idea of offering reassurance to travelers. I think all four of you have alluded to this issue in one way or another. Just quickly, JD, Thomas and Paul, in your different lines of work, what further reassurance could you offer the traveler that you are putting a range of measures in place that you believe will make them a lot safer? JD?
Yeah, so I'll speak for Intranova. So we've got a number of initiatives that we're hoping to provide peace of mind to travelers. And one is Book with Confidence. So our Travel Leaders division is rolling out a comprehensive program called Book with Confidence for travel advisors who commit to staying abreast of in-depth health and safety protocols for their clients. Separately, we've got one called Fly with Confidence, which is, we've talked about Common Pass. We partner with Common Pass and are promoting that as well. And I can tell you, just having used that being part of the trial, that I certainly felt a lot safer knowing that everybody around me had tested on the airplane versus what they're going to do after they land for 14 days at home. And I can tell you that testing is going to instill confidence, certainly vaccine along with everything else. But to me, the quarantine after the fact is too late by the time we've traveled. And then the last one, we've got to stay with confidence. So from a hotel health verification process, we've partnered with a company called ShareCare, which is part of Forbes Travel Guide. And this is to evaluate the quality of the vast myriad of health policies and solutions that exist at more than 50,000 hotels. So book with confidence, fly with confidence, stay with confidence. We think that's going to help engender more travelers to have confidence.
Well, a number of specific examples there. Paul, what about you? What are you putting in place to communicate with travelers to try and reassure them?
Well, first of all, we certainly don't have any crowding in our terminals. Cindy referred to the problem at airports, but we're incredibly strict. We've got thermal and temperature screening of all customers and staff, so no one gets in the airport without that screening. We've got social distancing markers. We've got people in PPE that are specifically requiring people to stand the requisite distance apart from each other. We are incredibly strict. We have a full disinfection procedure. We tried to get close to sort of hospital operating theatre standards of cleanliness across the airport. And I think the thing is, you know, if we just think that we are sitting back and not taking measures and just waiting for the pandemic to end, there's no exit strategy in that. And my concern here is that unless there is enforcement and also personal responsibility for people to take the appropriate measures, to wear a mask at all times, wear the appropriate PPE, to actually stay away from people, get tested, get into quarantine, all of those things in combination, A, are already in place, and B, will lead to a significant reduction in the rates of infection. I think air travel, airports, airlines, we're doing a huge amount.
So, but my question was less about what you're doing, because your earlier answer highlighted the range of measures you're putting in place. The challenge to me sounds like it's in part at least about communication. Cindy's alluded to it. Some of the other guests have alluded to the fact that passengers require further reassurance. So are there more things you can do to tell people about what you're already doing?
On a local scale, I don't think so. Everyone's well aware of the measures we're taking, and we're encouraging people to check with their airlines to find out what the appropriate testing and quarantine procedures by country are. I think one of the big problems is that people are nervous. If they start to travel and countries change their lockdown requirements, they don't want to get stuck. There's a great deal of confusion out there, but I think it does need organization, and it also needs enforcement. You know, we can't just live in a world where people sit back and wait for others to act. We have to reassure people, we have to get governments involved, and we have to get these bilateral procedures established so countries can demonstrate the risk of travel is minimal and the economic and social benefit is enormous. We've got to tip the scale on this to get this in perspective.
And so again, this word collaboration is coming up an awful lot. Andrew, Thomas, apologize. I wonder if I could read you this comment that I've just seen from, let me just find the person's name. David Harris says, the most important thing here is all verticals within the travel and tourism industry have to collaborate with each other, from airlines to cruise lines, hotels, tour operators, distribution channels. The entire ecosystem will fail if there cannot be collaboration and implementation. And I guess that's always the case. It's always the case that this industry is looking to collaborate, but perhaps it's more crucial than ever.
Yeah, I mean, certainly. I mean, we have been working with all the sectors you just mentioned. I mean, it's quite a given. I would say, in particular with the airports, because people need to get to an airport to catch a commercial flight. So, but I think if I can just say, what we really need, in addition to what we're all doing from an airline's perspective, because we've been implementing in Europe, the last couple of months since the ECDC EASA came out with their health and safety regulations and guidelines for COVID-19. I think the introduction of rapid testing technologies and the recognition by governments of the value of these antigen tests, because obviously the last couple of months we've seen a huge evolution and improvement of the validity of these testing technologies. Then, you can, what airlines are doing in Europe now, Austrian Airlines is just one example. you can create by that, COVID-19 free routes, travel corridors, if you like. And so we need to continue to do that, test it, pilot it, and show people that it actually works. And this is how I think we can, in addition, try to help to restore passenger confidence, and not wait until the first vaccines come to the market, because as we know from the previous panel, I mean, it will take a while before all passengers will be able to take advantage of it. So we can't wait. And I know that airports, I think in Europe there's about 100 airports that actually have been testing for quite a while, that have their own test procedures, their test centers in place. And that's what people like to see. And that's when people will want to travel again. Now, if you can convince the passengers, maybe we can convince them, their governments then to follow a route and just to recognize these new technologies will actually work.
And Cindy Friedman from the CDC, I'd like to bring you in here. To what degree can your organization and equivalent organizations elsewhere in the world help to coordinate the standardization of these testing procedures, whether in the US or at other points of entry in other countries in the world? Is there any way that that can be standardized? What's your mute there, Cindy?
Sorry again.
That's all right.
I think the testing, has evolved, and countries are being aligned better with regard to what to do in terms of testing and quarantine. It's evolved over time. I think right now in the US, we're trying to coordinate 50 state governments with different regulations. So that's a challenge in and of itself. But we do recommend getting tested 1 to 3 days before the flight. And the more tests that are available and the more rapid tests, ultimately the best thing would be to have a home test, like a pregnancy test, that the traveler could administer to themselves, but we're not there yet. But the more tests that become available, the easier this becomes to get tested. And then we have to rely on public-private partnerships with technology. I think some people mentioned Common Pass. There are other ones to have a way of verifying and showing officials that you have been tested and that you do test negative. I think more and more airlines are requiring some sort of testing before you travel. So I think that is becoming more normal and more standard across the industry. In terms of when you arrive at your destination, I again think that there's not only the risk of transmission during travel, but there's the risk of seeding infection into the communities where you're going. So it's important to know about the point of origin and the destination. And that's where getting tested again after travel, and the ultimate time is about 3 to 5 days after travel, and just staying home for a shorter period of time to make sure that that test is negative. We know that that isn't 100% foolproof, but it can reduce the amount of infections that go undetected, because remember that 40% of people approximately are asymptomatic. So they don't know they have an infection. They're not spreading it purposefully, but if they don't know, and they're not staying home, they can seed the infection to other communities. So I think that combination is becoming more standard across countries, across states, across the industry.
Cindy, thank you very much indeed. And Laurie, on the comments, says traveller confidence isn't just about transit time, it's about knowing they're going to be safe in the destination. Minister Bartlett in Jamaica has launched a program that guarantees safety and return home in an emergency situation. Beth Potter says, this is something that JD mentioned right at the beginning, public health systems are having a hard time staying on top of testing. Contact tracing at this point in time seems to have taken a back seat. How important will contact tracing be to the return of international travel? Well, Cindy, I think that would be a good one to direct at you first of all, as well as JD and Paul.
Yes, so contact tracing is important. I think there are also apps. This is another area for technology. There are applications that use Bluetooth technology, where it's really a sort of an easier, pain-free way to contact trace. I think what happens is when the cases are so overwhelming with this recent surge, and unfortunately, I don't think we're out of it yet with the holidays upon us, and there are so many cases that it becomes more and more difficult to contact trace. If every person has contact with numerous people, it becomes more difficult, and that's where technology, I think, can help, and the reliance on some of these apps for contact tracing would be really helpful.
And Paul, is there a role for airports in how a contact tracing system works?
Absolutely. And I think the thing is, a lot of people are thinking about this problem from the reverse angle. To me, it's all about getting tested before you travel, having a period of quarantine, and then testing again immediately before travel, because it's greatly reassuring to fellow travelers to know that every single person on the plane has been tested and at the time of travel has had a negative result. Now, we have 52 testing stations at the airports, and anyone can get a test on arrival from any country and get the results within 24 hours by signing up to the app that we have. And I think it's things like that which I think will greatly reassure people. There's no point in doing a lot of testing on arrival, because by then, as Cindy said, it's too late. If you've got the virus, you've spread it during travel, you've spread it when you've arrived at your destination. And then if you're quarantining, this is the fear of quarantine that I think is putting so many people off. It's actually greater than the fear of being infected. So I think we have to move to a test and quarantine before travel, and then have a contact tracing methodology that applies during and after travel.
But I wonder, Paul, you say that would be reassuring, and I'm sure it would be to the majority of travelers. What about someone who's coming through your airport who doesn't want to do it? Would you make it a prerequisite for traveling through your airport?
Absolutely. If the destination country requires a certain protocol, anyone traveling in transit has to comply with the destination country requirements. So if a test before departure is required, that transit passenger has to pass that test before they'd be admitted on the aircraft. This is about enforcement as much as it is about the methods itself. And I think the difficulty is a lot of countries have been pretty slow in actually ensuring that their citizens are complying to some very sensible procedures to keep the infection rates down. So I think it is about compliance, but it's also about having sensible and effective procedures. And quarantining on arrival is not a sensible procedure. It should be done before departure to guarantee that travelers are COVID-free before they travel.
I'm interested in this idea of enforcement. Thomas and JD, perhaps you could come in on this as well. I'm thinking, as Paul's talking of, the different restrictions that were brought in across the UK with COVID-19. And in some cases, it was the expectation that restaurants or bars or shops would be the ones to tell individuals, no, you're not sticking to the rules. And some businesses didn't want to take on that role. Do you think that this industry and the businesses within it are willing to be the enforcer, to use Paul's word, if need be? Thomas?
Well, I mean, you need to be careful when you use the term enforcer. I mean, we're not the police, we don't have the responsibility of police forces as airlines. But what can be perfectly done is, just to build on what Paul said. I mean, ideally, before people get to the airport, they should prove or be able to prove that they're negative, COVID negative. I would say, in addition, you shouldn't be able to board on an aircraft, or when you try to get your boarding pass online, you shouldn't be able to do that if you cannot prove that you're not COVID negative. Mm-hmm. So we can perfectly implement that system. Having said that, we're not the enforcer, we're not the police, but we know that airlines are already doing that. So it's just the technology is available. I mean, that's a no-brainer. And I think if you build on these measures, as also Paul said, this is how you build also consumer confidence. When people say, if I do travel with that airline, or if I go through the airport, I know I'm going to be safe. I know that, that's a safe environment. So it's, we're all in this together. So we really need to make sure that we work together. I know the airlines work together with the authorities, but as I said, from a technology perspective, it's perfectly possible.
JD, just before you come in, I can see Laurie saying in the comments, quarantining is travelers number one worry. Certainly it's in the top few, I'm sure. There's a question here saying it's understandable for people to get tested before a flight, but some countries, states and counties won't give tests to people unless they have symptoms, which comes back to your point, JD, at the very beginning of the need for the standardization. And Michael Croft says, Barbados has a good policy where a test is taken 72 hours prior to departure, and then guests have to take another test the day after arrival. They isolate in their accommodation until they get their negative test. This seems a good way. JD, let's come back to the points though that Thomas and Paul were discussing, the role of your business in helping to, perhaps enforce isn't the right verb, but to make sure that the processes that are agreed are stuck to.
Sure. Yeah, enforce certainly not the right word, but encourage and I think provide guidance, right? So we're advisors and we advise our clients on where to go and how to do it safely. And so I think advise is certainly one way. I'm not sure that anyone in the private sector can really enforce anything. I think that's probably government, and I think we need to have a standard response globally about what government's going to do. We're working on Hawaii, for instance, recently reopened, and we're closely watching that. Hawaii requires travelers to take a pre-travel test from a trusted testing partner prior to the final leg of their trip, and then again upon departure. So anyone arriving without a confirmed negative test are subject to a mandatory 14-day quarantine. And I agree with you. I think people are as afraid of quarantining and being stuck out of country as they are of the virus itself. I think that's really become one of the biggest issues. And I heard someone earlier on the earlier panel say, we're suffering from the solution, really, is what we're doing here.
Well, we've got 10 minutes left on this session. I want to focus on where you see customers' expectations and government's expectations heading as we move into 2021. Let's start with the governments. I've heard a lot of frustration from at least three of you at the regulations that are in place, but you're all dealing directly with governments and indirectly with governments. Do you think, let's start with you, Paul, that these regulations that you're finding frustrating, there's an appetite to shift them as the dynamic of the pandemic changes with the arrival of the vaccine?
I think there has to be, and I think, as I spoke earlier about the success of the UK-UAE travel corridor and the impact that's had on traveller confidence, I'm sure countries will look at measures like that and want to adopt them if they are effective, as clearly they are effective. I think one of the frustrations is that we saw the initial spike in the infection through the summer, northern summer, and then of course we've now seen a much greater spike as we've gone into the winter. And going back to the previous comments about law, I don't think it's up to the industry to be the enforcer of measures. It really is up to governments to make absolutely sure that the jurisdiction under which travellers are when they're in a particular location is strictly applied. And if people do not conform to the regulations to help stop the spread of infection, there should be significant consequences, because this is the problem, I think, that's leading to the overwhelming nature of the medical facilities in many countries. The measures are there, the regulations are there, they're just not strictly enforced, and they need to be.
Okay, but that's more broadly, isn't it, about how governments enforce their COVID regulations, but with specific reference to how governments view the regulations that affect your industry. You've mentioned air corridors. Do you think that is a good route out of the situation that you find yourself in, that rather than looking for blanket approaches globally, the industry should focus on certain routes?
I think the thing is, the industry already has the testing protocol. It knows how to operate the quarantine protocols. And if we could just get these lined up and get these air travel corridors open, then the possibility of the vaccine in the longer term, those will be the effective measures. But my biggest concern at the moment is the lack of logic in the sequence and method by which those policies are applied, and the lack of enforcement in a lot of countries to make them actually stick. You know, when regions in countries can't even agree amongst themselves what the regulations and policies ought to be, how are we going to get a single global standard. I don't think it's going to happen. So individual bilateral air corridors, I think, is the way to go, but it needs to be backed up by much stricter enforcement, which is the job of government, in my view.
But let's bring in JD on that point, because you started us off, JD, talking about the need for standardization. Do you agree with Paul's analysis that in reality, getting all these countries on one page is going to be impossible, and that actually it's better off targeting bilateral deals, which perhaps, while a little less desirable than a global solution, are a lot more realistic?
Yeah, I completely agree. Realistically, ideally, it would be nice to have, complete global coordination. But realistically, let's start with two countries, two international countries, and form that bilateral agreement. We've found that, I think the Department of Defense here in the US found that air travel can be safe with the appropriate protective equipment, advanced air circulation systems. And so air corridors, I think, London, New York certainly is a big one from our perspective. I think that a pilot program will be starting later in December between Atlanta and Rome, and all US citizens will be permitted to travel to Italy for essential reasons, as well as all European Union and Italian citizens. So you'd have to have a negative COVID test, of course, 3 times prior to departure. But those are the types of things. I agree with Paul completely that global coordination is a big ask right now. But I think let's start with 2 countries and work our way from there.
And Kirsty's responding to the discussion we had a little bit earlier about whether travelers will need to show that they've had negative tests. She said, I traveled 8 weeks across Europe this summer from a total hotspot country to the safest one. No one on the way was interested to see my negative test or where it came from. They just wanted to see my EU passport. She's wondering if we'll see a shift in that in 2021. Well, some of the answers we've heard suggest that expectations may shift on that front. Let's spend the last 5 minutes talking about the customer themselves. Thomas, do you think that some of the expectations and the types of regulation that we've seen come in during this pandemic are just simply here to stay, even when the virus is more under control? That travelers' expectations of health, of safety when they travel have shifted forever?
Yeah, thanks, Ross. Well, it's the measures that are being, the guidelines that are being issued by the ECDC and the EASA in Brussels are constantly evolving. So as soon as, and are updated, basically. So as soon as, for instance, there is more proof or scientific evidence that antigen tests are actually good enough to be implemented across Europe, those guidelines will change. So that's constantly being adapted. I just wanted to go back to if I may, these safe corridors. I don't think it's the end solution, but I think more importantly, what was mentioned is they will show some good practices, and they will show, I hope that also the rapid testing actually works, and hopefully that will convince governments that certain solutions in place actually do work, and then we can reopen the borders in a more coordinated fashion in Europe. So to come back, the regulations, the basis is in place, will stay there under an EASA umbrella in Europe, but they will constantly be adapted as scientific proof comes along. But it's not enough just to have, I would say, European regulations or guidelines. These are just guidelines. We need the national governments to actually implement them. And the big challenge, the institutional challenge we have in Brussels, is that health policy, unfortunately in this case, is not a European competence, at least not yet. So you've got a really scattered approach with member states going into all different directions. So that's something else, I think, from an institutional perspective, post this crisis, for other upcoming crises, because this surely will not be the last one, we really need to fix. And actually, because there's a general recognition in Brussels by all, the governments when they sit around the table here, that this is not a domestic issue, it's a pan-European problem. But we need to change the law, the regulations, to make sure that Europe can actually show much more of a fist and get things really coordinated next time.
Well, we'll see if they do that in Brussels. Just before we go to Cindy, one last time, Paul and JD, just quickly, do you think the customer expectations that we've seen rise during this pandemic are to some degree here to stay, Paul?
Absolutely, they are. I think, if you look in Asia after SARS, some years ago, a lot of travelers in Asia still are wearing masks before COVID-19 hit. So their behavior had changed up from the last pandemic that swept across Asia. So I think it will change. We've seen huge changes in commerce, in retail, lots of casualties in the retail sector. So I think all of those changes are here to stay. Some of those changes cannot stay, though, because if physical distancing is required forever, then basically the business model for a lot of the travel industry is completely untenable. And I think one of the important points when we talk about global harmonization, we have to remember that every single country is at a different stage in its ability to deal with the pandemic. Therefore, the chances of getting a global standard when everyone is at a different way and are also dealing with it using different methodology. I mean, in Australasia, they're trying to avoid it and have shut down the economy. In other parts of the world, citizens are not complying. You know, there's so many different things that need to be fixed, but I think the industry will change fundamentally.
And interestingly, those difference in expectations and approaches from the governments are also mirrored by differences in the customers as well. So it's very difficult, isn't it, to talk about customer expectations being standard around the world. Just very briefly, JD, do you think the habits of your customers and the expectations have been changed?
Yes, forever, I believe. I think that people will be, I don't know if anyone on the panel or participants here have looked to travel internationally in the last couple of months, but it is virtually impossible to find the right answer. And I think that one area that people are going to look to do is outsource to experts. I think that they're going to, in the same way that people have personal trainers and private wealth managers and whatnot, I think that travel is no longer going to be a do-it-yourself option. And I think that outsourcing to an expert is going to be a big part of people's lives, which frankly, you know, when we get through this pandemic and travel recovers, will be a benefit to many of the travel companies out there.
JD, thanks. Cindy, a last word to you. There's clearly a huge desire within this industry to see people moving again in a safe fashion. Can you offer them some hope for 2021 that the advice on traveling will shift as the nature of the pandemic shifts?
Sure, I remember to unmute. I just want to say that most people don't have personal trainers, so I would worry that that would be a very small market who would have a personal travel consultant. But I do think that there is hope, and I think that travelers want to be safe. They want to feel safe on every step of their journey. And I agree that there will be more acceptance of mask wearing in Western countries as there was in Eastern countries after SARS and MERS. I think there will be expectations for enhanced disinfection and contactless payment methods. There'll be more acceptance of technology for exposure notification and proof of immunity, such as vaccination and proof of testing results. And I do think we know that testing can help reduce the risk of COVID for travelers. So testing before and after travel can really help reduce the risk. And I think that the one thing that we'll see more of is availability of testing. I think right now that's a challenge for some travelers to where to find the testing, and it's different in different places. And once that becomes more uniform, you will see probably more people being willing to go and travel.
Cindy, thank you very much. As you were talking, I'm thinking about the message from the WHO right at the beginning of all this, when the head of the WHO just said test, test, test. But of course, the challenge is actually practically being able to do that in the places that you want to do that and in the time frame that the businesses want it to be done. Just before we wrap up, Dominique has just messaged. Dominique's a tour operator and says, looking forward to recovery, as like most outbound international tour operators, we've not seen revenue since March, but we need to put our care for our clients' well-being first. And of course, that is the tension, isn't it? This industry wants to get back up and running, but it wants to look after its customers as well. And How you do both of those things is what we've been wrestling with for the last 50 minutes, and those discussions will go on for many months, I'm sure. But it's been incredibly informative to hear 4 such diverse and informed perspectives. Many thanks to JD O'Hara from Internova Travel Group, Paul Griffiths from Dubai Airport, Cindy Freedom from the CDC, and Thomas Reinhardt from Airlines for Europe. We are going to take a brief pause just for 10 minutes, and then we're going to be talking about how we continue to look at the social impact of tourism and travel in the context of a pandemic. But for the next 10 minutes, thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you in a minute. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Ross. Thank you, JD, Cindy, and Thomas, for a fascinating conversation on some complicated issues that we are and will continue to be dealing with over the coming month. And thank you, of course, to all the participants for tuning in. The next session, as Ross mentioned, will focus on why the recovery of the travel and tourism sector is so important, namely its ability to make a lasting social impact on the hundreds of millions of livelihoods and community it touches. But before we kick off session 3, we'd like to share a wonderful video from our sponsor for session 3, Ras Al Khaimah Tourism Development Authority, led by Raki Phillips. Ras Al Khaimah not only understands how travel and tourism can be a force for good, but has made it their mission to ensure the sector is both sustainable and inclusive. So let's see this video. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Great to see all of our guests. Hi there. And thanks to all of you who are watching around the world. If you've got comments, by the way, as our conversation goes along, you can post them in the chat or the Q&A features, and I'll pick them up and put them to our guests as we go along. And the theme really of the next hour is to look at how travel and tourism make sure it doesn't just generate economic benefit, doesn't just generate jobs, which of course is a core ambition of the industry, but also make sure that it has lasting social impact as well on the individuals who work within the sector and also the communities who host the sector too. And let's start with some things that have worked. And I'd like to ask all of you, can you highlight an example or something you've done or a policy you've put in place where you've thought, yes, that has improved the social impact that we have? And perhaps Kate, we could start with you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ross. I'm thrilled to be here to talk about how Hilton continues to redefine sustainable and responsible travel. So this is a subject near and dear to my heart for many reasons. Corporate responsibility and social impact have really been at the core of Hilton's culture since our founding over 100 years ago. We found during that first century that time and again, when we come into a new community, it's not just about the impact, as you say, to the team members that work within our doors. It's really an impact for the surrounding community. You see this widespread halo that spreads out around the hotel, and it's really amazing. We actually coined a term going into our 100th anniversary called the Hilton effect to describe exactly the phenomenon that you see when these hotels come into these communities. And today we drive that through two key pillars. The first being our corporate responsibility commitment to travel with purpose, through which we've committed to double our social impact investments and cut our environmental footprint in half by 2030, in line with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, but also through the Hilton Effect Foundation, which we founded last year in honor of our 100th anniversary. And the mission of that foundation is to create a better world to travel. And we do that by investing in organizations that support environmental and social solutions for the communities that we serve. And one of the things that I'm most proud of and what we've seen work really well is we've really put both of those pillars to full use during this pandemic to drive some really positive changes so that when we are all able to travel again, we'll be seeing our communities more resilient and stronger than they were before and ready to re-welcome the world.
Well, there's a lot of detail there. I want to ask you in a minute about how you measure success. But before we get onto that, I want to hear some more examples from the other three. Doug, what about you at Visa?
Yes, excuse me. Hi, good morning, good afternoon, and greetings from the San Francisco Bay Area, where we're up and rising right now. And first, thank you also to Gloria and the entire WTTC team. I was thinking last night about the gathering last fall in New York in September, the Sustainable Travel Summit, and recognizing what an utterly challenging year it has been for the entire ecosystem. And so really appreciate this opportunity today. I think when we look at contributions to sustainable travel and tourism, I think across the ecosystem, different players bring different values and opportunities to the table. I mean, at Visa, we are true believers that travel and tourism are forces for good. I mean, our name literally is Visa, so it's embedded in our DNA. I think what we look at, we're clearly, we're not an airline, we're not a hotel operator, we're not a cruise line, but we play an important role in the payments ecosystem around travel and tourism. And we do so in a way that we look at how can we take friction out of travel and tourism or out of sustainable travel and tourism. So we as a company are always looking at ways that we can take friction out of commerce, and we're bringing that commitment over to the work in travel and tourism. So right now, the ways that we can do that is we're working with transit agencies in over 300 cities to make getting around by public transit for the inbound traveler, the inbound tourist, or the local resident easier with less friction. Particularly inbound travelers where they're facing a foreign language and have friction around how to actually use the transit system. We have worked in the past with the government of Mexico to look at how can we bring further promotion of travel outside of the main travel centers to disperse more fairly the benefits of travel and tourism out to different towns and regions. And then what we do in that case is work with the small businesses in those towns to add in acceptance of electronic payments, because our research has shown that small businesses that accept electronic payments, credit, debit from travelers see increases in sales of about 30%. So we're working there. We're also looking at how can we make sustainable travel and tourism more inspiring, more empowering. And a few months ago, you may have seen the Netflix series Down to Earth with Zac Efron, heavily about sustainable living as expressed through travel and tourism. We were one of the lead sponsors of that. So we're really looking holistically at how the data that we have, the transactions that we can enable, the growth of acceptance for small businesses, and the brand platform that we have all can help drive greater sustainable travel and tourism.
Lots to think about there as well, Doug. Thank you very much indeed. Brett, let's bring you in Los Angeles, I think. Tell me about how you have tried to make sure your business has a positive social impact.
Sure, Ross. Great to be with you all.
Thanks for being with us.
Over a decade ago, we started a nonprofit foundation called Tread Right, which we take a percentage of our profits every year and put towards, and then we support a number of organizations around the world in 3 pillars: planet and how to reduce our carbon footprint and impact on the earth through our travels, helping protect wildlife and its biodiversity, and thirdly, communities and people. Throughout this year, we funded all of our projects, which we're very proud of. And I think what this year has taught everyone in and outside the industry is how important our industry is to social impact. A number of projects we've done, to give examples that you requested. Next month, we open a new safari lodge in the heart of the Okavango Delta, and we'll be giving 110 people jobs there for the 12 tents that we'll be operating, which weren't there before. In Jordan, we support a women's cooperative called Iraq Alamia. 150 women live in this small community just outside Amman. Previously, they had no source of income. They were behind on their taxes and their electric bills. We've come in and helped build out a gift shop for them and are bringing our travelers there, past and future, not present, where they provide meals to our guests and we give them the opportunity to learn a craft from Jordan and those areas: carpet weaving, paper making, ceramics, and or learning how to cook some of the local cuisine. And then we take them into the gift shop where they can buy some of those trinkets that they've just helped make them with the local community leaders. And these women have been prospering with the support from travel and tourism.
Brett, does it get harder to keep committing a percentage of your profits when you're under the kind of pressure that you've been under in 2020?
Absolutely. As a family-owned and run business, fortunately with no debt, we've been able to do so. But I think the world has learned this year, as I said earlier, how important travel and tourism can play. We've been criticized in the past for over-tourism, fairly and correctly. But now I think we're seeing the exact opposite negative effects of no one being able to travel.
We're going to get into that dynamic as well, because I'm interested to hear the experiences of Hilton and Visa and what the internal discussions are when you say, well, let's do something. It's the right thing to do, but it's going to cost us money when there's such pressure on your bottom line at the moment. But first of all, Raki Phillips and Russell Kaimer, thank you very much for being with us. Thanks for sponsoring the session as well. Can you give us some examples from your experience of how you ensure that travel and tourism isn't just good for the economy, but it's also good for the communities hosting your work?
Sure. Good evening, Ross. Greetings from Russell Kaimer in the United Arab Emirates. Good morning to Brett, Kate, and Doug. You guys are in the US, so completely different time zones. I think it's a 12-hour time difference, but it's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for being part of this. Tourism, especially in the United Arab Emirates, is such a big part, because when you think about our contribution to GDP is about 12% of the country's GDP. And considering that the UAE is an oil-rich country, that plays a significant role in how important tourism and travel is in the overall ecosystem. So taking sustainability as part of the way we grow tourism in this part of the world is very important. It's vital to the ecosystem that we've built. Travelers are looking for experiences that are more sustainable. They're looking for something that adds a lot more value. Russell Kaimer is the northernmost emirate. We're 45 minutes outside of Dubai International Airport, and we are known as the Nature Emirate. So we've taken it as the pride and joy for us to drive a positive social impact that benefits the communities and travelers. We've worked with preserving the local culture, preserving the heritage. We've got 4 temporary UNESCO heritage sites. strengthening communities. But one of the biggest initiatives that we did was food waste. Several of our partner hotels, we have a large portfolio of Hilton hotels here in the Emirate of Ras Al Khaimah, but also many of the other international brands that we have. Food waste has been a big issue, especially with some of our all-inclusive resorts, and to educate international customers from all over the world that might not have the same values of sustainability that we've created. We've done a big part where as a government entity, we've given a cash reward incentive that goes straight to the bottom line of the hotels for whoever is able to lower their food consumption and their food waste the most. So we've done different incentives like that. On just a small example is the issues that we face with food waste in our industry.
Well, there's been some fascinating examples there, and such a range of examples, which I guess pulls me to several questions I want to quickly run through with you. Such is the range of examples you've given us, Kate. Is there sometimes an internal debate about what to focus on? Because there's a risk that if you aim at everything, you could perhaps not achieve anything.
It's a really good question. And that's why within those kind of broad goals I talked about with doubling our social impact and cutting our environmental footprint in half, we've been really specific with what do we set as those targets within those. We're also really lucky because we have a system that we've created. We've had it in place since 2008 called LightStay. And through LightStay, we're able to measure exactly how our hotels are performing, each and every one of them, all 6,300 plus that we currently have around the world. Reports into LightStay, how they're doing from a carbon, water, waste, social impact perspective. And so what we're able to do, and Ross, I think this gets to your point really interestingly, is all those little small pieces, those small moves that each hotel makes around the world is able to ladder up into that bigger movement. So we try to really focus on the local impact because we know that those small moves can really ladder up to something truly global and beautiful. But yeah, it is. I mean, it's a constant challenge.
Come on, Kate, be straight with me here. You've got all this data about how your hotels are doing, so many thousands of them. Do you name and shame them internally? Do you say this one's doing really well, but this one is not doing? So do you use the data to drive how your staff feel about this?
We do, and we do it lightly because we know the system, we know the spot that a lot of these environments are in, and we know what works in Chicago doesn't work in Shanghai, doesn't work in South Africa. So you have to be really thoughtful about how do you go into each one of those environments, because the fact of the matter is they know their environment better than we do. Me sitting here in McLean, Virginia, I can't tell somebody exactly what they should be doing in Ras Al Khaimah. I can give them big overarching goals, but then we empower them to do what's right for them.
Nonetheless, I'm sure it's very interesting to people watching around the world to know that Hilton can, via one piece of work, monitor how your different locations are performing. Doug and Brett, let me bring you both in here. Tell me more about the internal discussions that happen within your businesses when you talk about your desire to be economically successful, of course, and to employ people, but also to do the right thing. Now, I appreciate those two things aren't mutually exclusive, but there will be difficult conversations from time to time, I'm sure, Doug.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it is always a conversation and an ongoing one. But for Visa, we've been around 50, 60 years in different incarnations. We've always been about how can we bring and connect more people in more places. In our case, it's through the power of the network that we bring that has hundreds of governments connecting with thousands of financial institutions, millions of merchants, and over 2 billion consumers using Visa credentials to buy things, to go places, to really use it to help make their everyday spend easier and more convenient. And when we look at the role that we can play in economic empowerment, in environmental protection, really look at what are the core assets that we can bring to the table. And I think that it really comes down to, we certainly have data. We can see in an aggregated, anonymized way, many patterns in travel and tourism. We can see many patterns in other topic areas. We have a commitment to really help those not in the formal financial system today enter the financial system. So 5 years ago, we set a goal to reach 500 million unbanked and underserved with first-time access to electronic payments as a first rung of the ladder into formal financial inclusion, achieve that by 2000. And during that height of the pandemic, instead of talking about the economic impacts, and we certainly were impacted as well, and cross-border travel is an important part of our business, instead of pulling back, we decided to double down on that. We set a new target focused on small and micro businesses to reach and digitally enable 50 million small and micro businesses. And the Visa Foundation, in parallel to Visa, made a commitment of $200 million over the next few years to support the economic empowerment of these small and micro businesses. And it connects to travel and tourism because many of these small and micro businesses play important roles in the value chain at the community level around the world to help enable travel and tourism. So we didn't pull back, even though we were certainly economically impacted, but we actually doubled down and used this as an opportunity to help build back better.
What about you, Brett? Do you have internal conversations where people say, look, of course, I understand why we have a foundation that's trying to encourage social impact and to support people, but look, if we don't stop putting money into it, our actual business, our core business could be under threat. Do you have those conversations? Do you have to choose?
I mean, to some extent we've had to this year, but certainly not in the past. Being a family owned and run business, we make these decisions and we stick with them. But I think we spoke about this last year in Lucerne. It is about bringing everyone along to feel that they're a part of the mission and that they can be part of the accomplishments. No different in the hotel business or the amazing work that Visa's done that was just outlined. So it's about doing storytelling internally to explain to people why we're doing this, what the objectives are, and how they could be a part of it. Every year we offer all of our team volunteering hours where for 2 days they can go out on company paid time and volunteer in a local charity or organization that either they're very concerned and care about, or that the company office in that market helps organize, whether it's working at a food bank or in some cases it's supporting dog shelters, which come and go based on economic activity and how many animals are either given up, or right now I think there's more demand than ever for people wanting to adopt pets, obviously with the amount of time being spent at home. So it's trying to encourage their personal interests, but it's also having driven leadership that makes these decisions and then sticks with them so people can see that we are on a mission. And but I think the storytelling is the most important part of it.
And that was the very bit that I was going to pick up on and ask the others about, because while of course this is about companies looking outside to the rest of the world and making sure that you're good global citizens, the challenge of getting colleagues on board is a crucial one, because if they're not on board, your company's unlikely to deliver on these goals. And that comes back to what Brett's talking about, storytelling. Raki, do you have to consider that, how you talk to people about within the tourism industry in Ras Al Khaimah about social impact and social responsibility?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a core part of one of our pillars that we focus on as a developing destination. The advantage that we have is being a smaller destination. We can rethink, we can retool, and we can pivot the positioning that we want. For a long time, Ras Al Khaimah has been known as an adventure destination, and now we're incorporating the nature, the history, the culture, and all of that is so important to the new norms of the travel experience. But we also do need to work with the experts. None of us are really experts in this field, and it's changing so fast to make sure that we can establish ourselves as a leader in sustainable tourism. You look at other destinations that have done this at a great job, in a great way, but we also work with consultants. EarthCheck is a consultant that we have on board. They're an international sustainable tourism experts. They help us create genuine sustainable practices. And the research that we're getting from them has helped us really focus on probably four main. One is reducing food waste, which I talked about, tourism area cleanups, especially around Jebel Jais, our mountain region. We created a scholarship with the American University that's both green focused and tourism focused. And then green procurement is a big part of it. And that also means as new hotels come into the destination, new tourism efforts come on board, we make sure as a government authority that they are building things the way they need to be built, that they're developing things and they're maintaining the cultural integrity.
And that's interesting. And it sounds like you're building that into the stories that you're telling. Kate, talk to me about the stories that Hilton tells itself. So I'm talking about the internal dialogue, because I think Brett's point is a crucial one, that companies that do better at making sure they have positive social impact, largely have their staff on board, have everyone buying into it. And that normally is built around or built on storytelling, to use Brett's phrase. What stories do you tell yourself at Hilton?
Yeah, I mean, and it's perfect. I probably spend most of my time day to day trying to tell this story and hone this. But actually, it's the perfect time to be asking this question, because right now we have our Hilton Effect Week going on across our hotels. So internally, this is our annual volunteer activity. We're still doing it even in the midst of a pandemic. And well, it looks a little bit different this year, obviously, more virtual volunteering than kind of shoulder to shoulder going out and doing volunteer activities in the community. This is really our moment where we come together and we get our team members really having a hands-on, tangible impact in their communities and really focusing on, again, what makes sense locally and what they're able to do. And through that, you know, over the last few years, we've been able to contribute 1.5 million hours around the world to our communities. And our goal is to get to 10 million by 2030. So internally, I think when we tell these stories, it's both something that our team members can feel when they're going out and they're doing these activities, but it's also been something that we try and lift those stories up. So when there's a truly remarkable story of somebody, you know, there's a story that I go to in Egypt all the time about somebody who took a sabbatical to go work with UNICEF. And then we were able to highlight that story and then be able to build upon it through the foundation and do more work in that region based on that team member's work. So by elevating those stories, elevating those impacts, we're able to really get some amazing momentum behind every one of our team members. And ultimately, that speaks well to our guests, it speaks well to our owners, it speaks well to our leadership, and we're able to just keep that wheel going.
I've got a question for Brett. Just before I bring it in, Brett, I can see you nodding, Doug. Do you want to come in quickly?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I mean, for Visa, employees are just the center of the company, the heart of the company. And we have been continuing to express to our employees how to embody the purpose of who we are and what we do and how we help connect the world to uplift millions of people around the world. And it's so critical to involve employees. I think for corporate responsibility and sustainability teams in companies, it's not often that they are a very large team. Kate may have a similar experience. But I don't view the team at Visa for sustainability as just the small team that we have. I view it as the 20,000 employees across Visa. I suppose how do we involve them and engage them?
But I suppose the point I'm thinking, Doug, as you say that is, well, I would expect you to say that, but on the outside looking in, I know from talking to other businesses over the years that sometimes the CSR department ends up in a corner and doesn't feel central to the way that the business runs. How do you ensure that doesn't happen?
Yeah, I think I've actually had the opposite experience. And I think part of it was as we were making the commitment around financial inclusion and how to reach 500 million unbanked and underserved, we had a moment in time when the slide decks that were coming from our team had a title of "This is our financial inclusion strategy." And then as we were talking to the business around the world, they looked at it and said, "No, this is our emerging market strategy." This is, you know, there are 1.7 billion unbanked and underserved around the world. And that's people who are not using Visa credentials today who could, right. And we can bring together these missions. And so I think that's been the critical part for us.
Those two overlap. Right, here's a question for you from Alina, Brett, who says, how do you provide support towards local communities since March when tourism has stopped, especially in communities that rely heavily on tourism like Zanzibar? And she adds a second question, which is also, how do you address the disparities that we sometimes see, the huge disparities between the wealth of local communities and the wealth within luxury resorts? So two connected issues about the relationship between the business and the local community.
Sure. Great questions and very hard to answer. So in terms of the first one of the terrible tragedies this year is obviously how many companies with the impact on their financials have withdrawn their financial support of charitable donations. So that, I think, is one of the most heartbreaking impacts of this pandemic. Number one, probably being mental health and all the other impacts on our children that we've seen during this period. But those far-flung communities that depend so much on tourism, I think, have been awfully impacted, as we all know. And well, we're very happy to have funded our projects. They're obviously a minuscule drop in the ocean of the number of communities and projects that are out there, as we've seen the impact on wildlife as well without tourism. So I certainly feel for her in a far-flung destination like Zanzibar. I think the most important thing we can do as an industry coming out of this is with the great examples of Hilton, Visa, Intrepid, and so forth, is to try to bring more of our industry along so that as the recovery begins and continues, we can all see how we can impact and support local communities more than we have in the past, because without them, we don't have the opportunities to take people to new and different destinations and experiences, as those communities won't have the cultural or other heritage that they had before if we can't help preserve them. And so it is a virtuous circle, and it is one of gradual impact, I think, and collective impact. So I hope that the stories that Hilton, Visa, and everyone else shares, and thanks to you, Ross, for expanding that as well, whether we shame them or inspire them, either way, we've got to get more within the industry to help, because we're all in this together. And if we don't have those great places to take travelers to, then our industry and our businesses itself are threatened.
Brett, thank you very much. Alina, thank you very much for the question. And to pick up on what Brett was saying, you are all in your different ways making strong cases for the positive social impact that your respective businesses are having. And if you said to anyone within the travel and tourism industry, we want to have a successful business, but we want to have a positive social impact, we want to support the local communities who host us, so we want to be environmentally sound, no one's going to disagree with that. No one's going to say we don't want that. But we know, as Brett alluded to, that this industry still has work to do in these areas. So I want you to help me understand, and everyone watching understand, what's stopping this industry going further on these issues? What are the obstacles that stop people who would like their businesses to do better on this issue from doing it? Kate, can you, I'll ask all of you in turn, but Kate, what would you highlight as something that remains a blocker?
Yeah, I think, look, you alluded to this actually in the beginning when you talked about, gosh, there's so much going on. I think part of it, number one, is that every area is going to be a little bit different to be able to drive forward these things. And so I think it's being able, and the long list of priorities that all of our leaders and owners have, of making sure that this gets the proper billing. And so for some, that equation is going to look a little bit different. And also there's so many options out there about what you could do, that I think there is that little bit of pause of, okay, there's too much, I'm just going to go put this over in this corner. So it's number one, prioritization, and making sure that we have these conversations and that we're making sure that this continues to get raised up. And number two is the investment piece. You know, at least at Hilton, we're a primarily franchised model. And we know that, you know, our small owners are having a really tough time right now. So me going to them right now saying, hey, don't you want to invest, you know, several $100,000 into this new system? I mean, that's going to be a conversation dead on arrival. So it's helping to figure out, where is that particular owner? Where is that particular subject? And what can we do to drive the needle? And how can we do that in a way that gets people on board, gets people excited, gets momentum going, even if it's a small piece? So that's where that measurement component comes in, because you need to show the progress being made. Can't just be, hey, do this, you'll see the return in 5 years. It has to be, do this now and see what it's already done in the last year or two. So,
all right, so that's three things I've got there. There's, you know, there's prioritizing, decide what you definitely want to do. There's make sure you develop momentum internally and get people on side. And there's also be sympathetic to the investment that may be needed to help deliver on those priorities. So those are three. Yeah. Raki, what about in Ras Al Khaimah? Tell me about what the obstacles are to you doing even better.
I think a big part of it is it's a generational issue. To Kate's point, a lot of the hotel owners or investors might be an older generation where this is something that's new and they need to adapt. When you're dealing with a lot of the younger investors, this is, you know, part and parcel of the core of the way that they do business. We've learned that inclusion and diversity is important. Educating them, to the point that Kate had said, this is the benefit of why sustainability matters, why CSR matters. It's a key driver to customer loyalty and business growth. It cultivates a sense of belonging among travelers and employees. It gives them better engagement and a service to be able to do that. But the key priority, I think, is that the operators and the businesses need to work with the government entities to really leverage each other and lobby for the cases that are important to them. And we've had a lot of success with several of the operators that have come to us and said, we need to be able to take this to the next level. So any new hotels that are coming on board or any new attractions that are there need to meet a certain requirement that, and this way we've set the precedence for any owner that comes on board that wants to develop something new.
That is really useful. It really builds on a couple of Kate's points. So you're saying if you want to drive investment, you can't do that on your own necessarily. Work with governments to make sure there's substantial financial backing. And in terms of momentum, which Kate talked about, you talked about making sure the narrative around why are we doing this and explaining the benefits can help build that momentum. Invaluable there, Raki. Thank you. Doug, what about you?
Yeah, I think well, I think it really comes down to an argument about competitiveness. I mean, pre-pandemic, there's a growing body of consumer studies, visa studies, National Geographic, Lonely Planet, Hilton's own studies that we often look at, and others really showing the increased demand from travelers across demographics, across age ranges, that this is going to be something that of how we as a family, as an individual, are going to make our decisions about whether to travel, where to go, how to get there, where to stay, what to do while we're there, and how to get around. And as that continued demand increases, I think it's going to be an element of competitiveness for destinations. How are destinations marketing themselves and responding to that demand? How are individual properties? So I think there's the demand side and there's a supply side challenge here.
But it sounds like you think that case still needs to be explained to some degree. That one blocker, to use my phrase, is that perhaps the case hasn't successfully been made for these things to everyone yet.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a work in progress. And I think pre-pandemic, we were seeing traction in that. And I think more and more tourism ministers, more and more destination management organizations were really understanding that and saying, hey, we need to lean in on this topic area because a lot of it is even being driven both by millennial families. But I think keep an eye on, and I think there's growing recognition of the importance of the Gen Z family member in influencing the travel. And they may not have a lot of purchasing power around it, but they are heavily skewed toward looking for social impact, sustainability in their travel, and they're influencing the family's travel decisions.
Well, it's interesting you say that, Doug. I can see Sanjana just posting a comment saying involve students who are pursuing studies in the field of tourism in your discussions around this, which is I guess an industry scale version of a child in a family pressurizing the parents to change their approach. Brett, what about you? We've been in a number of discussions over the years about how to improve the social impact of tourism, and no doubt some progress has been made. But what do you think is standing in the way of that progress escalating further?
Not necessarily putting profit first. Excuse me. There's obviously been a lot of discussion on who is the most important stakeholder in the 21st century. Is it the shareholder or is it the communities you work in and so forth? I think Paul Polman at his time at Unilever did an incredible job to demonstrate that doing good, having sustainability at the core of your corporate ideals and strategies can drive the bottom line and make you one of the foremost admired corporations in the world to work for, especially for the younger generations that we have to engage with. So that for me is an inspiration of how we as an industry need to set better examples. And as I said, bring everyone along. It's very difficult, Ross, and I certainly don't have many of those answers because obviously at this time we're facing an existential threat to the sustainability of our own businesses, let alone the planet. We've all laid off thousands and millions of people. WTTC talking about almost 200 million people that have lost their jobs this year within our industry. So the numbers are massive and the recovery is going to take quite a while, but I think we need to keep sharing these examples. I really salute Chris Nazetta, the chairman of WTTC as well, CEO of Hilton, and Gloria for establishing a sustainability committee for the first time as one of our core pillars at WTTC and working with members to share some of the great measurements that Hilton's brought to the industry. Marriott have on the hotel side, breaking it into our different components, cruising, air, tour operations, and so forth. And we're just starting this, but the idea is to share more of these best practices, put more pressure on the industry to make more change because it's certainly needed. And I think the consumer is going to drive more of the need for change in the coming years as well.
Brett, thank you. You mentioned Paul Polman. He was the final speaker at the Sustainability Summit in New York that the WTTC hosted. He gave a very passionate speech, so passionate, in fact, that I failed to wrap him up about 3 times. But I think what he was saying was more important than finishing on time, so we didn't mind too much. Now, we've spent a lot of this session talking about grand ambitions, things that we hope will impact for not months, but years and decades to come. I'd like us to stop that for a moment and focus on the immediate challenges, social challenges within this industry. Here's a message from Nikki saying, with the temporary and significant loss of jobs in travel and tourism, Brett's just alluded to the scale of this, what investments are you making to help these workers and students to temporarily change lanes? It's a very interesting idea. When people have to step out of their current role within the travel and tourism sector, are there ways the industry can help them stay within the sector, if not within that precise line of work? Now, there aren't going to be solutions to every problem, but Kate, are there ways that Hilton can maintain a connection, maintain an employment relationship with people, even if it's not in the same job?
Yeah, and that's, I have to echo what Brett said. This has been a really challenging time. And for me personally, seeing some of the moves that Hilton has had to make to survive. What we've done that I think is really special is that Hilton truly ask their team members to bring their whole selves to work. And what that means is that we also have a responsibility to them to help support them however we can, even during difficult times, even when we're looking at having to do layoffs. So one of the things that we did back in the spring when our layoffs were at their peak was we did work with a number of companies on outplacement offerings. So helping our team members get jobs at other places that were hiring and trying to, even as they have to walk out the door, helping them so that they have a positive view of Hilton. So when we do recover and there are jobs available again, they might reconsider us. So, look, it's a challenging time right now for sure. But one of the things that we are continuing to do on the corporate responsibility and foundation side is continuing to invest in creating opportunities, especially in hard-hit areas. So through the foundation, we've made a number of investments, not just necessarily in hospitality specifically, but more broadly in communities that are seeing an outsized impact from COVID-19 to create opportunities for students so that you have that kernel of hope of what you need to be able to continue to see a future to drive forward. So look, it's not a perfect solution, but it's one that we're committed to continuing to make strides in.
And Brett, what about you? I know you've had to lay off a number of people in your business. What can you do to support them?
We haven't done enough, I must say, Ross. We've laid off probably 70% of our team this year, and it's certainly heartbreaking. But we have unfortunately had to focus with reduced hours and reduced people on those remaining with us. Our people and culture teams around the world have done an incredible job to try to work with some of our team that has been laid off, preparing CVs, providing them with job sites to maybe go to. But I won't sit here and say we've done enough, nearly enough. Sorry about that.
Do you manage to maintain contact with people who you're no longer employing in the hope that there'll be a point down the track when they can come back?
Absolutely. No, we've kept everyone's details. We've tried to help them in the US with the government support program, EDD, which really is not even funded. Some of the people laid off since April. It's just a travesty. But so we're certainly doing all we can to help them. And one of our big goals is to get recovery as quickly as possible so we can bring back many of our people from our contact centers to our sales teams and so forth, recognizing that as of now, very few are going to find new jobs.
Well, we wish them well, Brett. Raki, what about your situation? How can you support people who you can't continue to employ?
I mean, obviously, COVID's hit us really bad, and the global industry. I know WTTC in recent reports and the weekly meetings that we have said that globally the industry is expected to lose over 100 million jobs. As a tourism board, our focus was actually on our team, that we have to make sure that we enhance employee confidence and security. So some of the things that we do is we do bi-monthly free PCR testing. So everyone in the team gets PCR tested every 2 weeks. This is to make sure that everyone feels safe. We prevent the spread as much as possible. And the great thing in the UAE, maybe unlike other places, is you can get results almost, you know, in under 24 hours, and it's readily available. We've reconfigured our office space so that there is physical distancing around people. We did a happiness survey where we go in depth. We've offered flexi work policies. I mean, brand new stuff, especially for someone like me who's been in the hotel business since I was 19. We've really looked at ways to do things differently. We also offered hardship assistance. We've included that both working with our insurance provider, but for people that have had losses, for people that have had tragedies, that we were able to do that. We've just introduced lifestyle credits that they can apply towards coaching, even fitness classes. I mean, anything to make them feel better. But you know, there's big things that we can do, and there's also some little things. Something as simple as for people that are no longer with us or no longer working, to put a LinkedIn recommendation. I mean, something as simple as that does go a long way for them. We're working with all and through WTTC to try to find employment for anyone that we know is not working. We even got chat groups that we can forward CVs around and get them in touch with the right people. So anything that we can do, but we are in touch with anyone that's been affected in the industry, especially in our neighborhood in Ras Al Khaimah, and our focus is to make sure that the hotels and the businesses maintain, and we've done that by offering a stimulus package as well as reducing a lot of the fees and taxes and tariffs that we do, just to offer full support.
Such an interesting range of ideas coming from the three of you, from Raki, from Brett, from Kate. Doug, what about the situation at Visa? I appreciate that you're not a tourism and travel company. You're a company that works within the sector, but you'll have been affected like everyone else has by the pandemic. So how can Visa support colleagues whose jobs have gone?
Yeah, we certainly, you are right. We are very fortunate that, yes, of course, there's a economic impact on us as well, as cross-border travel dropped off significantly, as other areas of our business dropped off with people sheltering in place. If you think about everyday spend, what you spend on a daily basis, heading to work, being at work, out to lunch, coffee, et cetera, all those everyday spend items. But we absolutely appreciate that we are blessed to be in a position that our CEO, right at the start of the pandemic and the height of it in March, made a commitment that there would be no layoffs of anyone in 2020 at Visa based on the pandemic. And instead, what we looked at is how can we be part of the solution? How can we be part of the response? And how can we do so in a way that uses our products, our network? You know, can we be part of the solution? So we've been working with governments in many countries around the world to help on speeding up the delivery of social benefit payments out to individuals who are impacted. So we've worked in the US, we've worked in many other countries to do that. The pandemic really shined a bright light on small businesses, those that were digitally enabled and have e-commerce as options, and those who don't. And as the world went to e-commerce to be able to meet their daily needs, we said, hey, this is an opportunity. We can help small businesses get online and get online quickly. And that's why part of our small business response. And one more area is really, we've been looking a lot at, for those who are in a face-to-face transaction, they're walking up, there's a lot of reluctance to touch point of sale. I mean, something as physical and tangible as touching a point of sale. And so we rapidly rolled out and expanded our contactless payments so we could play a role there. And then just lastly, we also looked at our brand platform and how can we also help support small business and small business recovery. In addition to the philanthropic work I mentioned earlier, we launched some marketing work around where you shop matters to really highlight that there are small businesses out there. And we have a website that goes with it around building back better and bringing small businesses back online to help people be able to understand where are small businesses up and running and how can I support them. So it was really looking at how can we bring the full force of Visa to play a role in the pandemic response and recovery.
Doug, thank you very much. I'm sure that's invaluable to everyone watching around the world. We're heading into the last 5 minutes or so of this session, and I want to try and tie it in with a theme that really ran through the earlier session I hosted, and then the session before that, which Richard Quest from CNN hosted, which was all around how this industry coordinates at an international level. When we talked about how to get people moving in a safe way, how to open up international travel, a lot of the emphasis was on, well, different governments need to coordinate. In this session, we very much focused on the individual experiences that the four of you have had. But my guess is that for the social impact of this industry to be maximized, there's going to have to be industry coordination. Rivals are going to have to work with each other and share with the best practice with each other and so on. Brett's alluded to initiatives from the WTTC on this, but I'm interested to hear from the four of you finally, whether you're satisfied that there is enough cross-industry cooperation on social impact and how that could be improved. Kate, could I start with you? Do you exchange notes with Marriott and your other rivals?
We sure do.
Good.
So, and through industry efforts like WTTC, I think we're making some great progress. Look, it can always be better. And there's always going to be that thin element of competitiveness there, right? But when it comes to social impact, when it comes to sustainability, it takes collaboration to be able to make true global progress. So some of that you've just got to do for the greater good, right? And you do have
presumably a bit of that competition isn't so unhelpful because you're trying to make Hilton as good as it can be on this issue and your rivals are trying to do the same.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And look, we were very thrilled to be named #1 globally on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. Of course, we're thrilled to see ourselves really taking the lead. But at the end of the day, unless we can all get on board, unless we can work through groups like WTTC, that's really where you see the progress. And so I think, the fact, Brett mentioned it earlier, I'm very lucky to have Chris Nassetta as our CEO because he does believe in these things and we are driving forward an agenda. There's no more to do and you can't rest on your laurels here, but without this cross-industry collaboration, we won't be successful. So it's something that I'm very passionate about, and yes, and regularly chat with my peers.
And obviously, we're all here talking, exchanging notes as well. And Brett, you've alluded to some initiatives, but do you think there could be more space created for different companies to share what they're doing to assist each other?
Absolutely, Ross. I don't think we've done nearly enough. And just looking at some of the questions in the chat, I would also say we've got to bring more SMEs along. Comment was made that you've got some large corporations sitting here. I'd certainly say that's the case with Visa and Hilton, but I get the point. And we've always been criticized for not doing enough for SMEs and bringing them along. And so again, forgive me for saying so, but I do go back to WTTC and the new SME membership category that they have defined, thanks to Matthew Upchurch from Virtuoso driving it. And I just encourage those of you who feel you don't have a voice at the table to engage with WTTC, become a member of their SME category, and you can have a voice at the table as well, because we have to bring everyone along, Ross. And I think that's what you and the BBC does such a good job of challenging corporations about all the time.
Well, I guess we have one job, Brett, and that is our job. We do our best to keep the questions coming. Raki, what about you? You are, of course, competitive. You want your destination to be successful. You want it to become, the best it can be, and hopefully better than your rivals. But do you also share the successes that you're having in this particular area?
Yeah, I mean, we're lucky to be in the United Arab Emirates. I mean, our neighboring Dubai and Abu Dhabi, we work very closely as tourism entities together. We have regular meetings between each other to coordinate a lot of the efforts. And for us, especially in opening travel corridors between certain countries, we just announced one between the UAE and the United Kingdom that eliminates the quarantine. But we do talk not just within the country, but we also talk with other tourism destinations. I've had talks through the WTTC and through introductions that we've had with ministers of tourism across the world and seen the successes that they've had and some of the examples. Costa Rica and Slovenia are two countries that have done some phenomenal things when it comes to sustainability. And for us as a developing destination and a part of the world where, for example, it's hot here in the summer, so we need air conditioning. So the use of energy is quite high. And how do we come up with ways that we can really combat that? You look at countries like Iceland and other countries that are up in Scandinavia, and they've got it on the flip side when it comes to heat. So we are quite open. And I think if there is one plus side, one silver lining about the whole COVID pandemic, is as a tourism community, as in an industry in hospitality, we've gotten a lot closer. We've gotten a lot more open. We help each other out and talk a lot. And And I couldn't be more prouder than the WTTC, which has been a great platform. And honestly, the weekly calls that we have with them, I'm addicted to those like a Netflix series. I mean, we're there every week, and Gloria and the team lead it, and it's been fantastic.
Well, that's great to hear. I think what everyone watching has found so valuable is the amount of practical experiences that you've shared. And that really is at the heart of how people can learn about what's going well and what's not going well. I've got a brief challenge for you in the last 2 minutes. I want you each to give everyone one thing they should look up as an example of, hey, look this, go and Google this, see what's happening here. This is something which could excite you and inspire you. You've only got about 30 seconds each, so just give me the headline of it and people can go and hunt down the information on it. But can you think of an example where you think, yeah, this is something we can get excited about. This is an example of something that could inspire you and to get you going if you are not achieving all the things you're hopefully doing yet. Brett, you can mention one of your own if you like.
Oh, that's okay. Further to what Doug said about watching Zac Efron's documentary series, if you haven't seen it, I would, is also to watch Kiss the Ground. While it's not about social impact, it is about how we can reverse global climate change by looking after our soils, who can really help change global warming.
Thanks, Brett. Kiss the Ground is Brett's recommendation. Kate?
I'm going to cheat and give you one of our own. I would encourage folks to go watch the Hilton Effect video. 7 minutes long, but it's a great demonstration of exactly what I was talking about in the beginning. So bringing it full circle, those 7 minutes.
Hilton Effect, Kiss the Ground. Raki, what about you?
I'm also going to use one of our own. Google, in Ras Al Khaimah, we have the Al Suwaidi Pearl Farms. When you talk about sustainability, there's also cultural sustainability. And this is a gentleman who really was in love with his grandfather's pearl diving experience before the UAE discovered oil, and how he transformed this into a truly sustainable cultural business. And he when you go there as a tourist and you experience it, he shows you what their families lived through for months on months as they dived in the middle of the Arabian Peninsula to pull up pearls. So Al Suwaidi Pearl Farm.
Al Suwaidi, thank you very much. Last but not least, Doug.
Great, and I would say look up Travelist. It's a sustainable travel and tourism initiative that Visa, together with Trip.com, TripAdvisor, and Booking, launched last fall, together with the Duke of Sussex. Most people know him as Prince Harry, but the Duke of Sussex. We came together to launch this initiative. Now we ran right into the pandemic, and so we paused some of the work, but maybe it's a look it up and then watch this space for more work from the Travelist Sustainable Travel Initiative.
Doug, thank you very much. It's only been 50 minutes, but I feel like we've been given enough examples to go out and spend any number of hours and days learning more about this area of the travel and tourism industry. Doug from Visa, Kate from Hilton, Raki from Ras Al Khaimah, Brett from the Travel Corporation. We really, really appreciate you joining us for this final webinar of the day from the WTTC. And from me at the BBC, I'm going to go and prep for my show now. So thank you very much for allowing me to be part of these discussions. And Gloria and Tiffany, I will say goodbye from the BBC Newsroom and hand it back to you.
Thank you. And thank you so much. What a great session. It's showing us how making a social impact and profitability can and do go hand in hand. It's clear how our amazing leaders and our amazing speakers are stepping up from supporting SMEs to supporting the environment and wildlife, and how they're bringing their whole workforce along through storytelling to really make a lasting difference. We will send you a follow-up email tomorrow with the link to the recording for all 3 sessions. I would just like to wrap up by thanking our sponsor, Ras Al Khaimah Tourism Development Authority, and its passionate leader, Raki Phillips, our wonderful speakers for all 3 sessions, our amazing moderators, Ross and Richard, and to all of you for listening in, being patient given the technical difficulties, and engaging with us and asking all these questions. I would also like to thank our wonderful team at WTTC who made this event a reality. So thank you all. Thank you, Gloria. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Tiffany, for organizing this. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Gloria. Thanks, Tiffany.
Thank you, Brett. Thank you.
Take care.